Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful weekend here. Carolina Weather Authority's meteorologist Joshua Nagelberg with talk about what's going on here in the tropics and what may be impacting our weather here in the upcoming week. We do have another potential Gulf of Mexico threat, believe it or not, here even at the end of October, and I'm going to get right to that. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, invite your friends to, so that you can have the latest videos, and if we have lives, you'll be able to see those coming through as well. We also have a Facebook page, Carolina Weather Authority. It's WX, which is the shorthand for weather. And we've got links to articles and current weather conditions. I'll reload the page, even a couple memes here. Yes, it's 81 degrees outside, probably going to be our warmest day for the rest of the month. I hope it doesn't get this warm again in November or December, but should signs still show a pretty warm fall here in the southeast. So it could happen. We also have our website, carolinawxauthority.com, with articles talking about some of the medium and longer range, as well as what we're expecting weather-wise here as far as some rainfall this week. All right, so we have talked about the tropics quite a bit here in October. This season just doesn't want to seem to wind down. We've had a couple of breaks, sure, but unfortunately in the Gulf Coast states and Florida, we are again staring down the eyes of potentially another tropical system here. So here is our first forecast, and it will probably change, just so you guys know, but for planning purposes, of what we expect to occur with what we expect to be future tropical storm Zeta, which right now is still a tropical disturbance, not quite enough of a tight enough circulation for it to become a depression, but Hurricane Center still has a high chance of that happening sometime in the next couple of days. And it would be near the Cayman Islands in the Northwest Caribbean. A track would enter the Gulf of Mexico perhaps as soon as Monday evening or Tuesday morning, and then probably turning to the right and affecting the central Gulf Coast states, which should look familiar for those of you who went through Hurricane Sally as potentially a hurricane, but more than likely a tropical storm, just depending on how it interacts with the dry air to its west, how much wind shear is waiting for it in the north, and how fast the storm is going to move, how much time it could spend over land, perhaps the Yucatan or Cuba, will determine perhaps how strong this storm will be. You know, I don't want to say major hurricane right now. We think that that threat this far north is going to be a lot lower. I know you may have run across some of those videos out there on the internet, but honestly, the meteorology doesn't really support it. However, I would not be surprised if this storm ended up overachieving in the Gulf of Mexico, just like we've seen with virtually every other storm, where until it forms and until we have it wrapping up, we don't know exactly how strong it's going to be. We can only speculate at this point. However, the areas in red should be watching for the potential center of this storm to go anywhere in this zone. And yes, it's kind of a wider zone than usual because the storm has not formed a tight circulation just yet. So we're kind of going with a forecast off of a forecast. However, what I will say is that it's a lot less likely this system would affect Texas and western Louisiana than it would, say, for the Florida Panhandle. And that's based on the steering of the high pressure systems, as well as an upcoming front, which is going to be pushing into the area here for the middle of next week. Having said that, in the Carolinas, we could have quite a bit of rain headed in our direction. And in fact, that could be the case all the way up into the mid-Atlantic states as we get later into the week, before that storm system kicks everything out in time for Halloween weekend. So it could be, nonetheless, a very unsettled second half of next week, and we'll see the warm spell that we're in coming to an end, which is good news. But until we get there, we've got a lot of details that we need to iron out. Here's a look at the tropical cyclone heat potential in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. You can see it's still fairly high. The closer to Florida and Cuba you get, obviously it drops off closer to the Louisiana-Mississippi coastline. So a storm that would come over these waters should be weakening at that point. However, I've seen a lot of people out there who don't quite understand how it works say, oh, there's no way it'll be a hurricane, the Gulf is too cool. Well, I will tell you that that is not necessarily true. We still have above average water temperatures, and if a storm gets strong enough farther south, it could hold together with the right atmospheric environment to still be a powerful storm when it comes up here. It's looking less likely than maybe a storm that would come up this direction towards South Florida to be a hurricane, but certainly that chance is there, and we've seen a lot of things overachieve this year. So I want to leave that high-end option out there. Not saying that's officially the forecast yet. Most of the models are tropical storm at this point, but I would not rule out a Category 1 or, at worst case, Category 2 hurricane at landfall. But a lot will still have to be determined between now and then. We also have Hurricane Epsilon over the northern Atlantic, not an issue. Interestingly, the Hurricane Center showing that the pressure and the winds are actually stronger than what was expected earlier today, and that's because the storm passed over a buoy. And this is actually a much more powerful storm than was forecast by the Hurricane Center at this time. It's not going to be a threat to any land, although it will merge with a powerful system up here and affect Iceland and the UK. But just something that I think is interesting, and that the pressure is lower than forecast in an area that just does not have a lot of warm ocean heat content. So if it can happen there, I'm saying it could certainly happen in the Gulf of Mexico. But there are other factors as well that could also hamper that in the Gulf that we don't have in the North Atlantic, mainly dry air and wind shear. So we've got a lot of ingredients on the table. But here's the size of Epsilon. It's huge. It's pulling away to the east-northeast, will not affect directly Canada, but obviously kicking up the surf here across New England and the East Coast. Here is our disturbance, and from this time yesterday, it's actually kind of formed more off to the south and west, so it's in warmer water, but it's also farther south, and I'll talk more about why that's going on. We also have a couple of waves that are getting sheared to bits right now, but as they get farther west, we'll have to keep an eye on them for development in the Caribbean. And we've got moisture spreading out of this disturbance all the way into the Bahamas and the Florida Keys right now. So even if a storm doesn't directly come up and hit you, you're still getting that rain and wind action. Definitely a stormy day to be out, try to be out on a boat around South Beach, for example. Other than that, we've got ourselves a pretty big storm system over the Texas and western Gulf Coast states spreading northeastward. And we've had some severe weather with this, and also a couple days ago snow across the upper Midwest, with the next wave getting ready to push southeastward. All right, so here is a view of our disturbance. Here is a Grand Cayman Island. Here's Cuba. This is Jamaica over here, and this is the Yucatan and Cozumel. When I did the video yesterday, there was a circulation center up in here with a lot of thunderstorms. Now we see a mid-level center farther southwest by 150 miles, and that is changing our tune to our forecast. Because of this push to the south and west, it's looking a lot less likely that a storm system would try to come through Cuba and hit the Florida Peninsula. I'm not saying that the chance is zero, but right now it's looking so much less likely in places like Miami or up the east coast of Florida or even the Keys to see a direct hit from a tropical storm or even a hurricane, just because of the surrounding environment and the steering wind flow. So that is some good news for the Florida Peninsula. Of course, it also increases the risk of yet another system in the central Gulf of Mexico next week. So we're going to have to watch and see how exactly this forms until it does get enough of a closed-off circulation, and we'll have an idea when a hurricane hunter gets in there towards the end of the day today. I'm not going to wait to get the video out before then. We'll have an idea if how much wind is down here and how it's wrapping up and where a center is forming. I'm also going to show you guys the radar here out of the Caymans so that you can have a look. And this is Grand Cayman here, and yesterday there was a lot of rain in this area just to the west of Grand Cayman. Today it's exposed. There are bands of showers spreading on the eastern side, but all the heavier rain is all the way down here, almost halfway between Grand Cayman and the northeast coast of Honduras and Roatan. So it's in a spot where it can develop for sure, but the reason that we're seeing this reformation has to do with what's going on aloft. So models have shifted. This is what the model was showing yesterday, with a few tracks going over the central Cuban island and then maybe coming up through South Florida. And that's why I thought that there at least could be a shot at a hurricane in here, because the water's warmer here than it is out here. However, as we continue to push the forecast, notice how the starting point has moved southwest, and so the models overall have shifted west. This was last night's 8 p.m. run. This was the overnight run, and again, more models showing more of a move maybe into the central Gulf. This was the earlier run this afternoon, or today, showing more models than not going across the Yucatan Channel or even over the northeast Yucatan, and then at least a scare for Louisiana and more of a potential threat for Mississippi, Alabama, and even western Florida, kind of like a Sally track. But we still have a couple of models that have not pulled onto that into that reformed center and still pulls the system northeastward and then track it back to the west. But the point I'm making here is that the peninsula is seeing a much lower chance of a direct hit and more just fringe effects, whereas the direct hit potential is higher across, say, Mississippi, Alabama, and the northwest panhandle of Florida, and even far southeastern Louisiana. I'm sorry, Louisiana, because I know you don't need another storm, but you definitely want to be watching to see how far west this trend continues. Because if we have a new low pressure center, as seen by hurricane hunters, all the way down here, guess where everything is going to potentially go? Back to the west. Eventually, it's got to turn northeast as our next system moves in and picks it up. But still, some models showing Louisiana, even all the way back to close to even Lake Charles. Hate to say that, of course. But the good news is that the farther west the system goes, the weaker it will likely be, as the waters are cooler here than they are here. And that can certainly play a role in what would be going on here. Here's a look at the ensemble forecast system. We show kind of a scattering of where all the lows go, and it looks like Yucatan Channel most likely. There's one model that has a hurricane at this point in here, one here as well as a hurricane, while the others are a formidable tropical storm. But the overall model trend is now for the central Gulf Coast, not the eastern Gulf or Florida. I don't think Texas, this is in play for you based on the next system coming in. That will kick it eastward. But here you can see the European prediction system model as well. Shows, see these reds? These are hurricane, category 1 or even 2 in the central Gulf, weaker by the time they get here. The blues are probably tropical storm or marginal hurricane, whereas the greens are a much weaker system, a depression or a weak tropical storm. So the European models are showing anywhere from tropical storm to category 2 hurricane, but weakening, with landfall somewhere from the middle of Louisiana over to the Florida-Alabama panhandle, or the Florida-Bama line right there near Pensacola. Let's look at the steering flow as well. This is aloft. We have a large high-pressure system aloft over the center of Mexico, another one near the Hispaniola, and then we have a trough in between. That's going to bring the rain up into the Carolinas overnight tonight into tomorrow. The models a few days ago had this trough farther south, and that's why we thought an eastern track would be much more likely. In fact, my videos going back a couple weeks showed this trough farther south and east, breaking this ridge into two, and that would steer a storm northeast. This is Epsilon, so it's going out to sea. But the difference I'll show you is that this ridge here has ended up being a little bit stronger than it was forecast a couple weeks ago, and that's left us in kind of a holding pattern between these two ridges where the steering is weak and kind of convoluted. So we look lower in the atmosphere in the mid-levels, and we see high pressure aloft right over our system. So a much different look, as you've got high pressure aloft here and here, but then a weaker system would potentially get steered southward by this anticyclone around this high pressure region. So that's something to keep in mind as well, and that we could see more steering coming from the lower levels than the upper levels until this system potentially winds into a bigger storm. So we definitely don't have a slam dunk as to where this is going to go. Wind shear is still pretty darn high over the Gulf right now. It should weaken over time. Wind shear is low here, but right now the system is not organizing as quickly because this stronger area of wind shear is kind of pushed southward from yesterday, and some of that is impacting where the storm is potentially going to form. The GFS model from Tropical Tidbits shows a weaker system as a result of that, and never really strengthens this into much more in a tropical storm for southeast Louisiana, with all the heavy rain coming up through Louisiana, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, even to the Carolinas and mid-Atlantic, mixing with our next front. So it's going to be pretty darn wet over in this region here. I will show you the upper levels and what our atmospheric moisture, and you can see dry air is going to kick in here with this ridge, and it's going to provide a little bit less of a favorable environment for a strong storm to form. It's going to be fighting dry air early next week. It will pull moisture up with it, but the question mark is how strong does it get while it can fight that dry air? And right now we don't really know that just yet. Also, up in the jet stream, we do see a pretty good anticyclone, so the question mark, of course, is how much of this wind shear will affect the storm. And it looks like if the storm is in here, it will get sheared more Tuesday and Wednesday, so it will likely be weakening before it makes landfall. But we've seen some extreme things happen before. Now, the GFS is kind of more of a large-scale global model. Here are the more regional models, which have a finer tuning to them and can maybe pick up on where lows might be forming. Now, the GFS parallel, still going off of that older model thought where it could come up toward Cuba, but then will turn away from the Florida Keys and go into the central Gulf with landfall near Panama City as either a weak Category 1 or a tropical storm, but it's weakening. Whereas the Icon model, which showed a stronger storm yesterday, now is starting to see how that wind shear is impacting. It does actually bring this storm across Cancun, which does not need another storm, but it would be a tropical storm. Then it gets into the southern Gulf and does develop here in a favorable spot. It keeps the dry air kind of away from the core of the storm and allows it to become a hurricane Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, and then weakens as it comes up towards maybe Pascagoula or Mobile. So the general trend is central Gulf, not eastern Gulf, but we still have a lot of that to be ironed out. The other thing I'll show you is potentially how bad could this really be, and that's based on the water temperature and the surrounding pressure. And right now the models show maybe if it gets the most ideal conditions possible, a Category 5 in here, but a 4 here, a 3 here, a 2 here, and a 1 near the Gulf Coast. So this is not going to hit at anything stronger than a 1, we think. Most likely it's either a tropical storm or a 75 or 80 mile per hour hurricane. But a lot is going to change still. All right, folks. Well, I hope that wasn't too much info for you. Just keep it tuned here. This will continue to change. The areas in red, I think, are most likely to have the center of the storm track over them, and the area continues to be wide until we have more of an idea of what will make it into the Gulf Monday night or Tuesday of next week. All right, thanks for joining me. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. God bless.